Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of HIST Chronicles. And today we will be talking about a really difficult topic that has a significant part in our country's history, slavery. As most of us know, African Americans were brought to the United States from their home country and shipped over through the Atlantic Ocean in what was known as the Middle Passage. It is said that the intimate process of oceanic transport forced a confluence of violence and psychological sufferings that imposed perilous burdens on captives' bodies. The interior holds of slave ships became dangerous havens of disease and death. The conditions aboard these ships and how the slaves were handled were inhumane. Alexander Falconbridge, a surgeon aboard one of these ships, transporting slaves back to the United States, recalls a time aboard the ship. He states, "The men Negroes, on being brought aboard the ship, are immediately fastened together, 2 and 2, by handcuffs, on their wrists and by irons riveted on their legs. They are then sent down between the decks and placed in an apartment partitioned off for that purpose. The women also are placed in a separate apartment between the decks, but without being ironed. An adjoining room on the same deck is appointed for the boys. Thus, they are all placed in different apartments." Some of you may question how the slaves could have tolerated being treated like this without putting up any sort of resistance. Well, in fact, there are many accounts of slaves starting uprisings from trying to break free from their captors. Many Africans resisted enslavement. On shipboard, slaves mutinied, they attempted suicide, they jumped overboard, or refused to eat. Our best estimate is that there was a revolt on 1 in every 10 voyages across the Atlantic. James Barbot Jr. was a sailor present during one of these uprisings and was lucky to survive the event. Thus armed, they fell in crowds and parcels on our men, upon the deck unawares, and stabbed one of the stoutest of us all, who received 14 or 15 wounds of their knives, and so expired. Next they assaulted our boatswain, and cut one of his legs so round the bone that he could not move, the nerves being cut through. Others cut our cook's throat to the pipe, and others wounded 3 of the sailors, and threw one of them overboard. Just when you thought the treatment of slaves could not get any worse, the way that slaves were treated once they entered the United States was a whole other ordeal. Abuse towards slaves was a regular occurrence and was used by slave owners and overseers as a way of maintaining order on the plantation. For example, abuses against slaves were often used as a form of punishment or to promote the authority of the slave owner. More specifically, a slave could be beaten or whipped for working too slowly, stealing, or trying to escape. This was because slaves were considered property, and they were property because they were black. Their status as property was enforced by violence, actual or threatened. Frederick Douglass, a former slave that was able to escape his slave owner and become free, tells of what a slave did or did not do to get punished. A mere look, word, or motion, a mistake, accident, or want of power are all matters for which a slave may be whipped at any time. Once again, not all slaves were easily subjected to their masters and tried to resist in various sorts of efforts. Individual resistance by slaves took such forms as mothers killing their newborn children to save them from slavery, the poisoning of slave owners, the destruction of machinery and crops, arson, malingering, and running away. Those slaves that were able to run away had to be sure to not be recaptured by their masters, for their punishments would then be even worse than what they had been originally treated. Moses Roper tells of his punishment for escaping and being returned to his master not only once, but twice. Mr. Gooch had gone to church several miles from his house. When he came back, the first thing he did was to pour some tar upon my head. Then he rubbed it all over my face, took a torch with pitch on, and set it on fire. He put it out before it did me very great injury, but the pain which I endured was the most excruciating, nearly all my hair having been burnt off. On Monday he puts irons on me again, weighing nearly 50 pounds. He threatened me again on the Sunday with another flogging, and on the Monday morning, before daybreak, I got away again with my irons on. It was about 3 hours, going a distance of 2 miles. I had gone a good distance when I met with a colored man, who got some wedges and took my irons off. However, I was caught again, and put into prison in Charlotte, where Mr. Gooch came and took me back to Chester. Upon this he put the fingers of my hands into a vice and squeezed all the nails off. He then had my feet put on an anvil and ordered a man to beat my toes till he smashed some of my nails off. Perhaps the ones that were most affected by slavery were the children of slaves, with most being neglected from the attention of their parents due to the many tasks that they had to focus on. James W. C. Pennington recalls what it was like to be a child whose parents were slaves. My parents were not able to give any attention to their children during the day. I often suffered much from hunger and other similar causes. To estimate the sad state of a slave child, you must look at it as a helpless human being thrown upon the world, without the benefit of its natural guardians. It is thrown into the world without a social circle to flee to for hope, shelter, comfort, or instruction. I hope that all of you have been able to learn something today about the personal accounts of some of the slaves and those that have worked to bring slaves into the United States. And if you're to take away only one thing, please remember this, that no person should ever be treated as property.